I want to talk to you about this recent interview by President Putin. That is, he outlined what appears to be now expanded objectives, we can call it. That is, he called for taking all of Novorossiya under Russian control, which would then include everything up to Odessa. He talked about these buffer zones being lost in Kharkov, Sumy, essentially as a punishment for Kursk, as well as having obvious strategic objectives. And this is happening also as many of the front lines are cracking. I was wondering, do you see this as a new stage of the war, or how are you assessing this, I guess, new rhetoric?
If you look at Russia's progress during the war, it has been slow, but this is the fortress belt. This is Ukrainians built fortifications along this line for during those 8 years since the Maidan revolution uprising. And once those are passed, it's all downhill, and there's no fortification whatsoever. So once Russia passes this line here, once it takes all of Donbass, it will move faster, maybe twice the speed or more.
Rhetoric coming from the Russian president.
Well, first of all, I think that President Putin has said more than once since the beginning of this war that Kharkov and Odessa are historically Russian-speaking cities. So I hesitate to say that it was always the objective, but I think most Russians believed from the beginning that if they were going to do this, those two cities would have to end up in Russian hands. Secondly, I think he's looking at the reality that the security zone for Russia's interests and safety has to be much larger than originally planned or anticipated.
And this is something that Ukraine itself made the point for with all its drone strikes deep into Russia. And Moscow's just here. If Moscow takes this territory, then that adds 200 miles to the distance drones must travel from Ukraine to be able to hit Moscow. The further drones have to travel, the more fuel they have to carry and the less explosives. So creating buffer zone, it would limit the damage from drone attacks on Russia by forcing Ukraine to launch from further back. And taking Odessa and cutting Ukraine off from the sea, it means it won't be able to create any more chaos here in the Black Sea with its naval drones. Because once it has no more shore side to launch them from, that will be the end of it.
Let's face it, Ukraine has become a much more dangerous irritant over time than I think he expected it to. Ukraine itself as a nation, I would describe it as close to dead. But we have this facade of a government in Ukraine with an infrastructure of supporters, not much from the population, but hardcore supporters, thousands of mercenaries and foreigners, and They are able to launch periodically missiles and drones to create the illusion that there is some real power or influence there in the hopes of attracting more money. And I think you know that Zelensky wants $90 billion from Donald Trump, and Trump actually sat with him and talked to him, to my surprise. And to my horror, I'm told he's considering it. I hope not, but,
I don't know. If this was the old Trump of old, the normal Trump from the first term, no way would he spend $90 billion on Ukraine. But this new Trump is the Trump that attacked Iran. I sort of view Trump as semi-compromised. On some issues, he delivers wins for us. It's good. On others, he is terrible. So he's a flawed president, as far as I'm concerned.
Anything is possible these days. So I think that's a signal that there are plans afoot now, military plans, to make those things a reality. I don't think the Sumy exercise is necessarily a punishment. I think it's just a realistic appraisal that says, if we don't control this territory, we have no security in Russia. Russia cannot be secure. So Novorossiya, which was always, I think, in the back of everybody's mind, is going to become a reality. And I would certainly do that if I were in his position. No question about it.
Well, he also said that the objective of NATO in this war was the strategic defeat of Russia. Indeed, only 2-3 days ago, Mike Pompeo even tweeted this, that that's the only acceptable outcome, the strategic defeat of Russia. Now, I assume that Putin isn't going to allow this, but at the same time, he's seeing the Europeans increase their direct involvement in this war. How do you see him managing this, though? Do you think, as many argue, that he might decide that it's necessary to strike a European country, or do you think he will only look to essentially defeat Ukraine?
I think he's been asked privately, inside his inner circle, Mr. President, how bad must it get before we strike back? Now, we've watched the strikes periodically reach the outskirts of Moscow, St. Petersburg, Rostov, and so forth. They've hit some refineries, they struck a missile manufacturing facility, but they've also killed Russian civilians and destroyed Russian civilian infrastructure.
The missile strike on the missile manufacturing, that was, I think, the most damaging one. It was with Storm Shadow missiles, or Flamingo missiles, I forget which ones, and did hit the factory. And the missiles do damage in a way drones don't. They carry more explosive, hit harder, and that one was serious damage.
I don't want to say that he's decided that he's had enough, but I think he is at the point now where he recognizes this can no longer be not necessarily ignored, but taken in stride. In other words, it's time for some form of action. So that's number one. Number two, militarily, he is in a position to do any number of different things. He can take Odessa very suddenly and very quickly. He has the forces on hand, concentrated to do it. He'll have to do some more work with regard to the destruction of some of the drone assembly points, where the materials come in from Europe, and the drones and the missiles are then assembled as components of a larger system and then launched at him, or launched at Russia. He'll have to target those and administer some serious destruction, but that's not difficult to do. I don't think he has an inexhaustible quantity of Oreshniks, but he's got a lot.
I think that Russia has actually managed to hurt Ukraine's drone efforts with its campaign to destroy every single gas station in eastern Ukraine. And that has probably implications for civilians too, but in terms of they were firing these drones from trucks, they've also been targeting trucks. So any truck and gas station in eastern Ukraine has been a target. And I think that has hurt Ukraine's ability. They before that, they were launching like on a nightly basis hundreds of drones. And I don't think they've been able to maintain that pace anymore.
There's no question about it. He's had plenty of time to build up that surplus. So that much would happen. Odessa has to fall. Once Ukraine is landlocked and he is in a position to reach out to the Russian population in Moldova, which I'm sure he will, then the question is, what are the Europeans really going to do? And the truth is, they're not capable of doing much. You and I know that. But the Russians have been told otherwise. Now, what do I mean? From the very beginning, when you saw these fools in Ukraine run around with Nazi symbols on their uniforms, that was a red flag for the Russians. And that was something that anybody in Russia could point to as evidence for something that was wrong and had to be destroyed. Now,
we funded and promoted those Nazi symbol-wearing Azov Brigade. They were our way to turn Ukraine against Russia. Basically, those guys, the Nazi extremists, we funded through NGOs. They did an uprising, chased out Democratic president. Then they outlawed and banned every pro-Russian party and held elections. And surprise, surprise, now you have a West-aligned government. I think that any democracy that bans political parties is no longer a true democracy. Give the exception of political parties that are involved in terrorist actions. But there were no such parties in Ukraine when Maidan happened.
Now it's gotten worse. And I would argue it's worse because you have European leaders like this man Merz, who makes extremely dangerous, incautious remarks, along with his defense minister, von der Leyen, and others, about how Germany is going to build up into some giant military power with the obvious purpose of threatening Russia. You have similar statements coming out of other European countries and leaders. I don't know what the new Starmer Light will be like. I'm sure we'll get another version of Starmer, only less impressive, if that's possible. Macron is still with us. These people are all saying ridiculous things about Europe's potential to defeat and destroy Russia. If you're sitting in Russia and you're listening to this, and this material is, this material is being transmitted through the Russian media to the Russian people. It's not being censored. It's not being modified. It's being transmitted. What does the average Russian conclude? It's 1941 again. Here we go again. Another European invasion of Russia. Now, you and I know that's absurd.
the leaders across Europe are rabidly anti-Russia.
You could take the entire British army, French army, whatever it passes for a German army. Throw in the Danes, the Norwegians. What are they going to do? Where are they going to go? They couldn't even defend the Baltic littoral. They couldn't defend Western Ukraine. Who are we kidding? So what are you talking about? It's nonsense, but it's dangerous, and it's eliciting a very dangerous response from Russia. People don't seem to understand it. President Putin doesn't have to create a boogeyman for the Russians to fear. We've done that for him.
Yes, we have.
And we continue to do it. So it's very easy for him to announce new measures, expansion of reserves. They've already got a Russian army today that's well over 1 million. It's brilliantly organized, well-equipped, well-trained. I think it's well-led. I think many of the weak links in the chain of the officer corps and the senior ranks have been eliminated. If you were going to pick a time and a place to fight the Russians, this is a bad one.
Yep. Yes.
You're stupid to even consider it. So I think Putin knows all of these things. I think he's still going to move very methodically because that's his nature. But I think Odessa is going to come under.
I think Russia right now is strongest than it's ever been. Maybe you could make the argument the height of the Soviet Union, relatively speaking, was stronger in relative terms. But today's Russian army could defeat the Soviet army because technology has advanced. So, yeah, Russia today is strongest it's ever been.
Your attack, and it's going to be seized. Now, can he do more than that? Yes, he probably can. Will he? I don't know. I have listened to voices in Russia say this will not end until we are in Kiev, and we absolutely eliminate.
That is true, because it doesn't matter how much of Russia you take, even if you take like Odessa and most of the north and things, as long as you have the government in Kiev, you still have the same dynamic that Ukraine can function as a launching platform for drones into Russia, which is what Europe is using it for. Its purpose right now, its entire purpose, as far as Russia, Europe is concerned, is to serve as a launching pad for drones to attack Russia. That's the way Europe regards Ukraine. And the front line is just lose slow enough so that we can just keep attacking Russia for as long as possible. Ukraine has been sacrificed, and the Ukrainian people too.
This regime. I think a lot of people have reached that conclusion. And they don't understand why we have not done more. You know, the thing that's most tragic about the entire picture, Glenn, is that in Russia, at any rate, people genuinely like Americans. And they think that Americans and they are alike. Now, that's not really true. We would make good strategic partners for different reasons.
The average American and the average Russian could get along just fine.
But we are as different from the Russians as the Chinese are. That doesn't mean we can't get along. But I think they have developed this view that we have a lot more in common than we do. And at the same time, they have this very positive picture of Trump. They think Trump is really a good person, that he really wants the best. They don't understand what they're dealing with. The reality TV star who migrates in the direction of whatever promises to make him look good. That's not what they're accustomed to. You know, all you have to do to contrast Trump with President Putin. Look at Putin on the stage, the way he behaves.
I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure that Russians have cooled on Trump, at least given his actions in the last year.
The way he holds himself, how he dresses, how he speaks, the audience. Look at the people that are in the audience. How do they dress? How do they look? How do they comport themselves? Then look at what we've got in the United States for a president. It's totally different, completely unrelated. Putin is as close to a czar as you're going to get in the modern world. And he does have one foot in the czarist world. He's got another foot in the Soviet world. He knows both. And he has moved Russia down, I think, a very good path to unity and prosperity, because he understands that those are critical. With unity and prosperity, you also get security. No one in the United States thinks like that. Trump doesn't even consider those things. But for better or worse, they think we're friends. They think Trump is a good guy.
Well, Trump, it seemed like he was going for a diplomatic path. It seemed that he thought it was.
He did end, at least, the monetary contributions to Ukraine, which was good as far as Russia is concerned. Although apparently he's considering giving them $90 billion. That would be a complete betrayal of his base, but we'll see.
It was better for the US to get along with Russia and essentially it will bring them over to our side of the ledger. But since those days, he now appears to have embraced his inner Biden. That is, he's made this his war as well. I mean, part of this is also linked up, I think, with this new narrative, which is just coming out of every media outlet across the West now, which is that Ukraine is winning again. What do you think? What do you think the calculations by Trump is? I mean, you mentioned he might start sending billions in aid again to Ukraine. So, what is the strategy here? Will the U.S. go back deeper into the war against Russia?
First and foremost, you must understand that there is no strategy. There never has been. We had something resembling a strategy as a result of...
Yeah, I would agree with that. Trump, first of all, his base self is against all these foreign wars. That's Trump's first term. So Trump's second term, he has been doing stuff, but that's probably because he's been convinced to do it. And like he was convinced to attack Iran. But it's not the motivation isn't coming from within Trump. So there is no grand plan on Trump's part. He's just going along with people that are convincing him to do stupid decisions.
Of George Kennan, his Mr. X article, and what then subsequently became a containment. Since then, our strategy has been to retain control of the 750 bases in 80 countries, to continue to exert influence in our pursuit of financial hegemony. And see, what underpins financial hegemony in the American mind has been military hegemony. So the American thinks, well, if I spend $1 trillion on defense, I get all these benefits, including financial hegemony around the world. That's all nonsense, but that's the way people think. Americans think of defense as you go to the Super Bowl.
It's not entirely nonsense. United States financial hegemony is reinforced by military hegemony. There's a reason why all these Middle Eastern countries peg their currency to the dollar and sell their oil in dollars and keep all their money in the United States. We have bases in their countries, and we prop up their regimes with our military power.
Market, you buy something off the shelf, a loaf of bread, butter, or, a roast beef, whatever it is, and that's defense. Well, we buy this, we've got defense. No understanding of how you build military power or anything else. So this is what confronts President Putin. This is what confronts the Iranians, the same thing. There is no strategy. And whatever President Trump wakes up in the morning and decides to do is what we do. And he is not planning the systematic demise or destruction of Russia. Absolutely not. Wouldn't know how to begin. So what's he trying to do? Well, he's trying to do whatever he thinks is going to benefit him and his presidency. And a little down the line, it may be helpful to America. How he defines that is beyond me. I have no idea. I see no benefit to us from...
Trump is a deal maker. And that means if it's not something that's one of his core priorities, it's something he's willing to make a deal with. And I'm sure that his decision to attack Iran, and in addition to being convinced by Netanyahu would be easy, it's also give and take by the people in Congress, Republicans in Congress he deals with, and the deep state. They help him implement some of his agenda, and he does some of the things they want. That's probably the point where we are. He is still an idiot to let himself be tricked into attacking Iran.
From involvement in Ukraine in any way. I see no benefit to us strategically from attacking Iran. So, somebody says, well, what are those benefits? I haven't got an answer because it sounds stupid to me. But the problem is that's where we are. That's all that you've got at this point. So I understand that there was supposedly a recent meeting involving President Trump and his inner circle and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and maybe some other military leaders to talk about what do we do if we resume bombing with the goal of, quote unquote, finishing the job. That's about as crazy as here's $90 billion, now go win your war in Ukraine. It's absurd. We know that everything that goes to...
The midterms are just months away. I don't think Trump's stupid enough to start an all-out war with Iran again.
Ukraine, about 50% of it just disappears into corruption, the black hole of corruption. And what happens to the rest of it? Well, a lot of it is sold off. I mean, Ukrainians have been furnishing Colombia and Venezuela and Mexico cartels with all sorts of interesting equipment and capabilities that were given to them by Europeans and by us. You would think President Trump is aware of that. I don't know if anybody ever tells him that. I don't know if he were told that he'd believe it. Who knows? But there is no strategic framework. There is no end state. It's all about how do we stay on top? In other words, how do we remain the world's financial hegemon and military hegemon? Well, we've just discovered that we are not the.
I think Trump has been brought on board on that topic, on maintaining U.S. hegemony. I don't know how they convinced him to do that, but his actions seemed all geared towards that.
World's military hegemon. We've been defeated unambiguously. Instead of recognizing that and saying, oh, it's time to step back and reconsider what we're doing, he's talking about doubling down again. No, it's worse than insane. So when you see all these globalists...
Because that's how the United States has operated for decades, taking out one after another of hostile regimes like in the Middle East, like we took up Libya. Then we turned our focus to Syria. Well, first there was Iraq, then Libya, then Syria. And for what was it, 13 years, we funded the uprising, we slowly fractured the country. And then finally, the Assad regime fell in December 2024. And as soon as Syria fell, now our focus is Iran as the next big adversary to topple. There's no thinking of whether this is a good idea or whether we can win or whatever. It's just, okay, we finished, crossed out Syria. It's done. We got it. Now it's Iran. And all our attention devoted to Iran. It's not like we'll ever stop attacking Iran. It is the next target. It is the top of the list. It is the one we can now go after. And it doesn't matter what type of deal or MOU we sign with Iran, it's still the target. Only issue is they sort of have screwed with the Strait of Hormuz. But unfortunately, the United States deep state military industrial complex can't have that type of deep thinking. It's like Iran enemy attack, even if it's suicidal.
They come out of the woodwork. I listened to Neil Ferguson the other day. Oh, Ukraine is now in a position where it could strike back and win. You know, I don't know of anyone who is sane who has visited Ukraine, who thinks Ukraine has a snowball's chance in hell of winning a war against Russia. What is much more likely now is that the Russians are that Putin finally says, that's enough, no more. And remember, he's in a tough position. When I speak about Russia, I've always had people say, well, McGregor, sure, you say this, the Russians can do this. You say the Russians are doing that. Well, if they can do all those things, why haven't they already won? Why haven't they crossed the river? Why haven't they entered Kiev? Why haven't they just marched west? In other words, nobody believes you until it's done. The burden of proof is on Russia right now to prove that it can do what it can. There's no thinking that says, listen, let's sit down, let's bring this to an end quickly. This has gone on long enough. This is not in the interest of Europe, not in the interest of Ukraine, certainly not in the interest of Russia or the United States. So how do we end this? That should...
If Putin just stays the course like a idiot or a little bitch and never escalates, and just allows Europe to just send endless amounts of drones into Russia and kill Russian civilians, he could endanger him politically. I mean, the anger is getting to that point in Russia.
Should be the question. No one is talking like that. That's the tragedy.
Well, I think it's... I think most of the public, as well as political class, of course, the other hawks, but a lot are just trapped, I think, by the narratives. If you argue that, well, we should negotiate a new security architecture for Europe that also accommodates Russian security concerns, and thereby removing Ukraine from the front line of a divided Europe, then the pushback will be, well, that's a pro-Russian thing to do. And instead claiming that, you know, Ukraine is winning in a war it can't win, which is destroying the country and possibly taking us to direct war with Russia. This is somehow the pro-Ukrainian position. So there's no discourse around it. No one has to unpack their arguments. It's just, it's sloganeering, very emotional sloganeering, and doing a lot of harm at the same time. But I agree that, well, if Putin now decides this is enough.
Yeah, nearly cult-like, the attitude towards Russia and Europe, in that you have to criticize Russia and be warlike towards Russia, otherwise you're a Russian sympathizer. You'll be ostracized and forced out of government. There's no thinking of whether it's a good idea to be hostile to Russia, or if making an enemy of Russia will benefit Europe strategically. No, none of that. It's just cult. Go after Russia.
And they decide to escalate in a big way to put an end to this war. What would that escalation look like?
Well, I tried to describe it for you. I think first and foremost, they would move to seize Odessa and transform Ukraine into a landlocked country. Ukraine, historically, and you know the maps, I don't know if you've ever shown those. Most Europeans that live in the West or live in Central East Europe, they don't understand Eastern Europe either. And so if you look at the maps historically, Ukraine is really not what Ukraine is today. It's a northern portion that reaches across to almost to Kursk. In other words, there's this sort of open area. It's an area, not a nation, you know, in the strict sense of the word. So stripping Odessa from it is inevitable. It was never Ukrainian, never part of Ukraine. It was founded by Tsarist armies that conquered the area and threw out the Mongols and the Tartars and the Turks. So the question now is, what do you do at that point? If you're in the West, you're going to try and counterattack. You're trying to throw the Russians out. Good luck. That's not going to happen. But I think the Russians can do that very, very quickly and very decisively. When I say quickly, the Russians are methodical, so they'll take months to do these things. They could also very rapidly enter Kiev. They could come down from the north, from Belarusia. I'm told they have tens of thousands of troops there, including something between 20 and 30,000 North Koreans that have not been committed to action, along with the force that is now in Sumy and dealing with the 3 fortress cities in the center. Those are about to fall, which means that you can reorganize and reconcentrate all of these forces in Ukraine and move them wherever you want. So I kind of see 3 potential moves. One is Odessa, one is across to Kiev, and another is down from Belarusia towards Kiev. That can be done. How they will do it, when they will do it, you know, those are questions I couldn't possibly answer.
So you think taking Kiev could be a key objective then? I mean, this is the mother of all Russian cities, they say.
Yeah, well, it can't be ruled out. If you're sitting in Moscow right now and you're looking at the mess you've got on your hands, and the West, if the West has to deal with a government in exile that sits in Lvov, okay, we don't have a map again, but if you go to Lvov, that area used to be part of Poland, Galician Poland. Then it became part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, initially Austrian, then Austro-Hungarian. That's one problem. That
if you want to get a general idea of what it's going to look like afterwards, Russia's probably going to have all the blue area. Maybe they'll take Kiev too, this little section, and this will be Ukraine.
And the good news is that the Poles have recently discovered Ukrainians are back up to their old tricks, and it's gotten ugly between Warsaw and Kiev, and rightly so. I mean, how many times do you have to sit there and watch these Ukrainians celebrate people that murdered 100,000 Poles before you finally wake up and smell the coffee? And from the very beginning, you know, I talked to Russians and they all said the same thing. Why don't they just turn Western Ukraine over to the Poles, let them deal with it? And everybody would laugh, say, because they know if the Ukrainians hate us, they hate the Poles more than they hate us, and it's going to be somebody else's problem, but let's get it off our plates. I think you could probably sit down at the table with all the states that border Russia and Belarus right now in Europe and come up with some sort of solution everybody could live with. But you have to have rational people. Putin is rational. Warsaw is becoming more rational, finally. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, I don't know. Those people are worrisome because, you know, I remember the Germans used to talk about them in the 1870s and 80s because they were expressing all their opposition to the Tsars and how much they hated Alexander III and so forth. The truth was, they weren't badly treated under the Tsar. They'd actually had better living standards, and many aspects of their society were much better off than Russia.
Black Sea is cold, but a beach is a beach. I'm not sure about that. Are you sure the Black Sea being cold? Because it's given its location, it's relatively shallow body of water in the summer. I think the Black Sea would heat up quite a bit. You see, it's not like the huge body of water like the Atlantic. So let's look that up. Surface water is optimal for swimming, typically averaging during summer 73 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. I think you were wrong on this one, Proton Snail. It ain't cold, the Black Sea, during the summer. And it makes sense that Crimea is such a nice vacationing spot. You're right next to this really warm sea. You have a beach. No surfing, but the rest you have.
And finally, it took Moltke for Moltke and Bismarck to get together and say, shut up. You know, we're not coming. Get along with your neighbor. The Tsar is not the bad person you say he is, and you need to talk to the Tsar. We're at this point where we should be saying similar things. Get along with your damn neighbors and shut up and leave us out. But, you know, you have a president like Trump who is flattered by the thought that he is a great man who can meddle and make decisions and move the chess pieces. Bad business.
Well, as we see, there's an energy crisis, of course, in Ukraine. There's a manpower crisis. We see some fracture along the front lines, especially Zaporizhzhia is becoming a key problem now for Ukraine. And at the midst of this, Zelensky suggested that they might attack Belarus as well. How do you make sense of this? Is this just bluster to create some headlines in NATO to show that Ukraine is winning again, or do you think they could actually go this way? Because I would think that the Russian response would be quite fierce if well, it would definitely change the dynamic of the war.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Zelensky is the captain of a sinking ship. The waves are lapping over the decks.
They are.
He's going under. So what can he do to survive? Well, the last thing he's going to do is make peace. The last thing he's going to do is suggest any...
I actually think it's more likely that it's a Ukrainian that ends up taking out Zelensky rather than a Russian. Because once the war is over, and it's going to be... People are going to look like how badly Ukraine got screwed. How many men Ukraine lost to accomplish nothing. Just the deal that was on the table at the beginning of the war was better for Ukraine, far, far better than the end, how this war is going to end up. They're going to lose Odessa, the port to sea. Just that alone, that people are going to be absolutely furious. We sent millions to die just to lose the war and to lose everything and to lose every single strategic point. And Zelensky will be blamed. 70-80% of Ukrainians wanted the war to end, and he ignored them and continued the war and just completely screwed Ukraine over and got so many killed in the process. So I think the Ukrainians have far more reason to be angry with Zelensky than the Russians. He wasn't being propped up by Western intelligence agencies. I think he'd already be dead.
Any sort of arrangement which would marginalize him and his government. In fact, if you look at Israel right now, Israel's kind of in a similar position, although people in the West don't know it. The situation inside Israel is terrible. It's terrible inside Ukraine. There are millions of Ukrainians who are sick to death of this war. They would love to get rid of Zelensky. You're closer to it than I am, so you get to talk to journalists that go over there frequently. I get to talk to a few Germans from time to time who are willing to share their impressions. But my impression, based on what they report, is that Western Ukraine is a disaster, and the people there are sick to death of this whole thing, want nothing to do with it. So what do? You do what Netanyahu is doing. Netanyahu says, we will never leave Lebanon. He tells the army to dig in, set up checkpoints, build strong points. When you're failing badly, you don't admit that you're failing.
Well, apparently 6 Ukrainians tried to take Zelensky out just recently in a coup attempt, an assassination. It failed, sadly for Ukraine.
That's not what you do. You strike back with whatever you've got left until finally you go under completely. And I think that's where Ukraine is headed. Unfortunately, I think
at this point, I don't think Russia wants Zelensky out at this particular point in time, because they're just about to take all of Donbass and start to move to take Odessa and more key regions. They're just about to get through the fortified line that had been holding them back all this time. And they finally going to be able to take big swaths of territory. So if Zelensky is taken out and suddenly there's a sane person that's in charge of Ukraine and immediately sues for peace and gives Russia everything they want, they might not have the excuse to go after Odessa. They might, if Ukraine basically submits to all their demands. And I think a lot of people in Russia would be upset.
That's where the Israelis are headed to.
So do you see any diplomatic pathway then? I mean, by comparing with Israel, I think many Russians were looking towards what happened, with the war against Iran, and many of them, I think, concluded that all the negotiations were, tricks by the Trump administration, and even the MOU seems to be an initiative to buy time, perhaps, because it seems very unlikely that these points will be implemented. If I feel like the Russians has reached the same conclusion as well, that there is no diplomacy, there is no spirit of anchorage, that it's essentially all gone. But if this is correct, that will only leave war, then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, I think what happens is the boy who cried wolf. You're familiar with the story. Most of your viewers are. And that's what the Europeans are doing. They're crying wolf. And the wolf is coming. If this nonsense doesn't stop, they'll get what they don't want. The Russians will strike back. There's no doubt about it. It should not be excluded as a possibility. They should not bet on the perpetual goodwill of President Putin.
No one likes doing this, I don't think.
President Putin wants to do business with Europe. He wants to get along with Europe. But under the circumstances, if he can't, he'll do what he has to protect Russia. So I think we're headed on that road now. How far will it go? How long will it last? I don't know. Sometimes, when the army, the foreign army is at your gates, then people finally wise up and then want to negotiate. And that may be what happens. You'll end up with Russian forces that strike back violently and decisively. I hope not. But how else do you end this thing? Because if there's no strategy, how can there be diplomacy? What do you tell the diplomat? We want you to go meet with, say go meet with the Russians in Poltava. Sit down there. See if you can work out a solution. The diplomat says, well, what do you want to achieve? What's the goal? What's the end state? Nobody knows. Well, we want to make sure that we look victorious and the enemy looks feeble. That's what it's all about. It's optics. With Trump, it's optics. That's it. That's all there is. There's nothing else.
I have done the dishes before, many times, hundreds, thousands of times. That's, I still don't like it.
So what are the Europeans going to do? They're trying to exploit the optics, the desire for optics, by creating the myth that Ukraine is the phoenix rising from the ashes thanks to drones, and that the world will change. So please give us more money so that we can go out and wage more war and save you in the West from the inevitable invasion that is coming from Moscow. It's all crap. Let's be frank. I hate to be so coarse at this point, but you and I and a lot of others have been talking about this for a long time. People don't listen to us.
I maybe disagree a tiny bit here in that if Russia never escalates, if it just continues as it is, never brings more force to bear, and Europe just endlessly sends drones into Russia and adds missiles to that, and actually increases the number of drones, they'll eventually start doing some real damage to Russia. Yeah, it might even get to the point where it would hinder Russia's advance, the amount of damage they could do. We're nowhere near that point yet, but if the amount of drones into Russia doubled or tripled, add in some missiles that do extra damage to that, yeah, it could have an impact. And that's why Putin should escalate before it gets to that point.
They listen to the damn leaders that they've got in power who are selling them out every day. And until they wake up and conclude that they've got the wrong people in power, not much is going to change.
When you look at the economic situation, though, how long do you think this can go on? Because the main leaders in Europe now, they're quite unpopular, but the economies are also quite shaky, yet they want to send more and more weapons, more and more money to Kiev. But now even the Germans have begun to express some concern about the budgets. That is, things are not looking well. If the economy tanks, a lot of things can go wrong. Did you see the possibility? Like, how do you see the possibility of continuing to drag on with this war? Because the Europeans are still making the point that it's too early, too premature to talk about any diplomacy with the Russians. I mean, this is 4.5 years of boycotting diplomacy. So,
well, I know that in the next 12 months we have roughly $18 trillion in treasuries that have to be rolled over.
An insane amount.
Or that's an average coupon of 3.3%. The 1-year treasury now in the United States is roughly 4%. So you roll that at $8 trillion today at the current level, you're looking at $49 billion in annual interest costs. And that's before you factor in the interest burden on the ongoing $2 trillion annual deficit. Glenn, I know we're broke. Let's be frank about it. We're absolutely broke. When it comes to the oil situation, you get different interpretations. But I'm told that within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're looking at very, very perilously low levels in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The military privately thinks that we need at least 240 million gallons in order to be prepared to do much of anything. Barrels, 240 million barrels. I don't know where we are now, but I know we're getting close. I imagine the situation in Europe is as bad, if not worse.
Yeah, we're heading for an oil crunch. The exact time it happens can vary a little bit because China, for one, has reduced its the imports of oil. I think at Trump's request as a favor, and he's agreed not to sell weapons to Taiwan or something like that. But anyway, so that delayed a little bit that oil crunch that's going to happen. It depends how much oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. I have a graph of that. Here is what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. As you can see, there's a spike. This was the strait opening, so all the ships inside rushing out because they've been trapped there for months and they want to get out. Now, And then there was the escalation with Trump. Now it's gone back down to this level. This is about like 1/6 of what it should be. But more oil is getting out. So that will delay a little bit the actual oil shock. I think it's end of July, early August right now. If more oil goes through straits, it might be moved back to like mid-August when the oil crunch happens. But it's going to happen in these 2 months, July and August. You're going to actually start having physical shortages. That's when things get interesting.
Gilts in London, which is the English word for treasury, they're in a lot of trouble. I don't think the economy there is going to hold up much longer. In France, I think everything depends upon the same thing as it does in Germany. If you're in Germany or France, you're waiting for your check to arrive from the government. Where's my pension check? You know, and so that I can go on vacation or I can do X, Y, and Z. When that stops, when that's disrupted, when that's interrupted, then all hell will break loose.
Yes, this is what I'm talking about. Like currency collapse, it's the end of pension checks. It's both. And when that happens, yeah, you're going to have, that's when I think you get the mass deportations, to put it lightly. That is when the globalist elites, pitchforks, rounded up with pitchforks type situation. Hopefully they get put away in jail for the rest of their lives, if we're lucky. If they're lucky. And, then we get mass deportations and all this nonsense about war with Russia ends, etc. But I agree with him. It's going to take, the pension checks ending before the true solution to everything happens, I think.
That's much more important to people in Europe, as you know, than what happens in Russia.
Yeah, no, when the economy goes, the priorities obviously begin to shift quite quickly. But until that happens, there's the contradictions, because on one hand, we keep saying that Ukraine is winning, it turned the tide. On the other hand, we see the need to escalate in a big way with these strikes, often from NATO territories with weapons.
Every time I hear that Ukraine is winning, I just can't help laughing a little bit.
Our weapons targeted by our intelligence, I would put US in that category, obviously, as I think they do much more on the intelligence part than the Europeans, just because of capabilities, I would assume. But now another new development is that Finland has now made it, changed their laws. So now they can store nuclear weapons on their territory, not their own. But do you think this could be part of Trump's pivot back into the Ukraine war, that is actually station nuclear weapons in Finland? Because it would be hard to predict what kind of consequences this would have. Yeah.
So you have Russia, you have Finland right on Russia's border. They're hosting nuclear weapons. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we went apeshit just because this little nation called Cuba dared to have nuclear weapons right near us, the United States, the superpower. And now Finland wants to be the Cuba of Europe, the one who hosts nuclear weapons and makes itself a huge target of superpower that is Russia. Oh, there's no way that could work out badly for Finland, right?
Well, it's very reckless, obviously. And here the Finns have done a land office business with Russia for decades, benefited enormously from cross-border trade with the Russians. They shut it all down and shot themselves in the foot, much like the Germans. Why they would feel the need to have a nuclear weapon on their soil when the Russians have not threatened them nor expressed any interest in doing so. Now, the Russians, on the other hand, are going to look at this and feel that they then are going to have to station forces, including nuclear-capable forces nearby, so that they can neutralize Finland. What a disaster. I mean, this is just insane. But if you are buying the globalist argument, remember, the globalist argument is very simple. Russia is evil and bad because it has national character, national identity, national culture, borders that it protects, and it refuses to submit to all of the trends and wishes that we've been listening to from the European globalists.
Great.
Somebody said, well, what does Russia have to do to be welcomed in the globalist committee in Europe? And I said, well, I guess they have to learn to speak some new language. They all have to become transgender persons and advocate for boys and girls sports or something. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, they did all that. The globalists would like them a lot more.
It's sort of lunacy. It's kind of 1919, 1920 Bolshevism on steroids. That's not going to happen, obviously. And the people that are running Europe right now are globalists. They're all part of the same ruling elite class. They're globalists sitting in Washington, D.C., here in the United States, an hour plus from where I live. And they are very much of the same mind frame. Now, do most Americans that vote support these things? No. Do most Americans want them? No. It doesn't matter. In other words, democracy itself in the Western sense has become a meaningless facade. We have no control over the people that actually govern us anymore. So the only way out of this, I think, in the short run, not just long run, but short run, is bankruptcy.
Yep, agreed.
That's where the West is heading.
Currency collapse and bankruptcy are the same. Yeah, U.S. goes bankrupt, the dollar collapses. Financial system too, treasuries, everything. It's all linked.
Most of it.
I think President Putin wisely has waited for this to happen. It just hasn't come about yet, and he's disappointed and was hoping that it would come sooner rather than later. All you have to do is go back to it.
I knew we had been heading to currency collapse for a while, but it comes a lot slower than you'd hope. And until a good chunk of the world starts de-dollarizing, I don't think you're going to get the dollar collapse. That's what it takes. What you see places like Iraq fully de-dollarize, like stop using the dollar, and those dollars head back to the United States and start causing inflation. Again, the de-dollarization spiral will bring down the dollar.
Aliza Weidel, she gave a wonderful speech a couple of weeks ago in the Bundestag. She enumerated all of these problems. And then she said, what's the first thing that we're going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to Moscow. We're going to renegotiate our arrangements with Moscow, our relationship with that country. She absolutely rejects the globalist threat picture, and she's right to do so. Then we've got to get control of our own country, of who's in it, and the rule of law. Germany used to be a wonderful place where you could walk across any major city in that country 20 years ago, 25 years ago, at 3 o'clock in the morning and fear nothing. Not anymore. And that's what the AfD is about, and they're not the only ones. These elements are all over Europe. But the governments remain in power. They have to be removed. And the only way that I see that occurring right now is as described. The checks do not show up in the mail.
Yeah. Well, the former advisor of Zelensky, Alexei Arestovich, he made a similar comment. That is, if he would run for president of Ukraine, he said the first thing he would do if he won would be to go to Moscow and promise that Ukraine would never again be used as a front line by NATO against Russia, and he would also accept these painful territorial concessions.
That's at this point, Russia doesn't want someone like that in charge of Ukraine because they'd have to give up on Odessa. They're right about to expand to get all of Donbass and start going after Odessa that Catherine the Great founded. It's if they had someone rational suddenly in charge of Ukraine, it would make things awkward.
Again, for me, it seems at least someone's talking about doing something about removing the threat to Russia. It's kind of strange now, especially in Europe now, where the assumption is, Russia's imperialist, so any offered attempts to even talk to it will just appease and reward Putin. But you can't challenge this. There is no debate at all. But that kind of took me also to my last question, which is, how do you see this war? How does it end? And how does Europe look like after this war? That is, I can't see a possible end to the war, because even if everything east of the Dnieper River falls to Russia, why would the Europeans or the US as well want to give up a proxy where they can just, as long as...
Ukraine's role, I said it, is a launching platform, a place for Europe to send their drones deep into Russia to hurt Russia. And as long as you have even a little square kilometer of Ukraine, it's good enough excuse to send drones. So, even if Russia takes all of this, you can still send drones from this part. It'll be a little bit farther back, so a little bit harder to hit, but it still pretty much functions as a launching pad for drones. So Russia will have to, I think, take even the parts of Ukraine that it doesn't want to hold forever. Like this, the blue, I think that'll be part of Russia permanently. This, it's going to be just like the United States does, regime change, where we go after countries all around the world. We bomb the hell out of them. We regime change them, but we don't want to conquer them. Hell no, we don't want them to become American citizens and be able to vote. Same thing for the Russians. Those Nazi brigades, those Ukrainians that have Nazi, they don't want the Azov brigade to become Russian citizens. So they will be a Ukraine. It'll be small, pretty powerless, weak, and pathetic, but it will exist, and the rest will belong to Russia.
call it the resistance in Ukraine, can launch drones, missiles into Russia and continue to try to weaken it. So how does this war actually come to an end?
Well, Glenn, you know that we Americans have this unfortunate habit, utilizing the Central Intelligence Agency to influence elections. And we have influenced recent elections in Europe. I think the leadership in Romania, in
Some of our interventions were just so blatant, like actually canceling an election. If there was a result we didn't like, cancel it, redo it, and get the result you want. The most undemocratic thing in the world.
Moldova would certainly be different from what you see right now, had we not meddled in those countries. I think there are several leaders at the top of NATO who are compromised, who are effectively agents.
Agreed. I think all of NATO and current Western leaders in UK, Germany, and France are basically U.S. puppets.
For U.S. interests. They are tools of Central Intelligence. This is not new. This is not a revelation, although some people will be surprised to hear this. The point is that has to end. And how do you get rid of these people? Well, you have to wake up the populations, get them to recognize the criticality of their interests. You're beginning to see that in Germany for the first time, since the 1970s, when we went through this debate about the theater or intermediate range nuclear force, the INF. You'll remember that before we got to the treaty. And Helmut Schmidt came in, he took over the government and steered Germany in support of it, which at the time was the right thing to do. It was necessary. But there were people then saying, it's time for us to become neutral. Well, it wasn't. A good time for that would have been right after the Second World War, or certainly in the early 50s, but that opportunity was missed. Maybe in the future. I think I see the Germans now moving back in that direction, recognizing that they do have core national interests, and those have to be respected. So when you say, how does this end? I think it ends when we pack up our things and go home. Number one, we leave. We butt out. Somebody said to me, when's this war with Iran end? If the MOU is not worth the paper it's written on, how does it end? It ends when we sail away, we fly away. Because remember, we don't live there. This is what Europeans need to remember. We don't live there. Charles de Gaulle kept trying to tell them that Americans do not live in Europe. Okay, he's right. So we pack up our things and we say, that's enough. We can't afford to stay. We're leaving. By the way, that's something that privately President Trump wanted to do back for...
Already 5,000 troops are out of Germany.
5-6 years ago when he was in office. Didn't know how to do it, but he wanted to disengage. Not commercially. We continue to do business. We want to be partners. But we want to get out of this business of garrisoning other people's countries, right? Dismantle it. It's an anachronism. It's being demonstrated that it is an anachronism in the Persian Gulf. All the forces that we put on the ground in Europe today that should be there to protect Europeans from an imminent Russian invasion, that's the theory, they would all be eliminated in the opening minutes of any war by precision-guided missiles and unmanned systems. Hello, that's the way it is. War.
Just look at, that's exactly what happened with Iran and our bases around the Middle East. The opening minutes of the Iran war, all these bases got targeted and destroyed to various degrees. We have bases in Europe too, of course, and if there was a war between NATO and Russia, those bases would cease to exist because Russia can hit even harder than Iran.
Warfare has changed. Doesn't work anymore. It needs to get out. Doesn't mean that Europe is defenseless, because what Iran has done, every European country can do. And the European alliances that want to exist, that will work with each other, that are culturally comfortable with each other. And I think that's very important in Europe, where they share certain interests. They can build the kind of capability that Iran has built that defeated us. So this can all be done. But as long as we're there, as long as we have our fingers in this, and as long as we're putting up money, it's going to be very difficult to get around that. So I always say we've got to go. And I don't say that meaning I want my country to fail. No, that's just nothing to do with it. We've got to get out. And when we do, it will end. And I think that's what President Putin understands. And that's why I think you're going to see some military action coming in the near future. I think you will. I don't know how decisive it will be. I hope it's enough to persuade the Europeans it's time to sit down and put an end to this and have some serious talks. It's funny. I remember you in particular, years ago when we started talking about this stuff, who said, the longer you wait for talks, the longer you wait to negotiate, the worse outcome you're going to get. I mean, people didn't seem to listen.
Obviously, if Ukraine had negotiated before the war started even, they would have a much better outcome.
And we act as though we won against Iran. We keep talking about
If Russia really wanted the Donbass, this region, they would have taken it 8 years ago, well, now more than 80 years ago, in 2014 when there was the Maidan Revolution and they took Crimea. Russia resisted taking this land. And for the 8 years that followed, it wasn't until Ukraine was about to go in and basically butcher the ethnic Russians in the Donbass that Russia finally was forced to step in. And Ukraine didn't need to force that. They could have negotiated and gradually reintegrated these territories into its borders by being more respectful towards the Russian language, etc.
Iran has to meet these requirements. Really? They won. We didn't. That's what Vice President Vance is telling everybody. Now, what are you going to do? Tell Putin that he has to fulfill these obligations or we're not going to talk to him? He's winning. Now, if people don't believe he's winning, then he needs to demonstrate pretty conclusively that he is. I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, no, it could be in the very near future.
It's not only against Russia. It's any country that is not aligned and subservient to the U.S. hegemony gets tarred. Like Assad in Syria, vilified. North Korea, Iran, Russia. And China's just... The United States used it for all its outsourcing. So it was more... The criticism of Russia is tempered, but there's still a lot of criticism of Russia too. Of China too. Any country that dares to stand up to the United States or not go along with the United States gets targeted. Iraq, of course. So, Russia, there was a time, though, where Russia were the good guys. It was right after the fall of the Soviet Union when basically the U.S. was busy looting Russia and gutting Russia. Following, and there's horror stories from back then. And during that time, Russia, you go to read Tom Clancy novels from that time, and Russia is the good guys. They are helpful, subservient, pathetic servants. But, you know, on the good side. Then, of course, Putin came into power, stopped the looting, and then Russia became the bad guys again.
Future as well. Anyways, we already ran out of time, so... thank you, as always, for sharing your insights, Colonel. Much appreciated.
All right, Glenn. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Well, that was a good video. It's pretty much the situation. And look forward to the day where Russia has a lot more of Ukraine. And now this is going to... These are the 4 oblasts that Russia's targeting, which it virtually already has. It's only missing a little bit here. Then... it's going to expand its goal and go for all of this. It'll be interesting to see how the Western media spins it once they start rapidly expanding the territory under Russian control. Once the fortress line in the Donbass falls. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you next video. Bye.